and then the Egyptians put the Israelites into slavery and enslaved them, and they cried out because the Egyptians were very difficult and hard on them, trying to enslave them. They cried out to God. God delivers them. That's what we're going to be studying. You got a free people now. You got a free people, and they're wandering in the wilderness. They're headed toward the promised land. You got a large company of people. What do they need? Well, they're going to need food. They're going to need shelter. They're going to need water. They're going to need sustenance. But more so, though, when you got a huge group, an entire nation marching across the desert, what do you need? They need leadership. They need leaders. They need law. They need revelation from God. They had no law. They had no rules. We're in the patriarchal period. That's where this idea of the simple suggestion is revelation. Not the book of Revelation as in the New Testament. They needed God to reveal himself to them, and they needed God to reveal himself and deliver a law to them. Did God reveal himself to them? By all the events we're going to be reading about. Also, was there even a physical presence of something that indicated the presence of God? What was it? A what by day and a what by night would accompany them. Cloud by day and a fire by night would accompany them. Okay? Probably representing the Shekinah or maybe the glory of God. Who knows? Anyway, God reveals himself to them. He does that. All right, any thoughts? Any questions? Now, we can even break that down a little bit more. The book of Exodus. Okay, in the very first chapter right there, we're talking about the need for redemption. There's a need, right? They're in bondage, correct? They're enslaved. The Egyptians are attempting to murder their sons, their children. So they want deliverance. They pray, they call for it, they beg for deliverance. Well, it's to come. When you open up into chapter 2, we see how then preparations begin to be made for a deliverer. For a deliverer. Who is that? Moses. Moses. Let me tell you, there's some parallels here now. We see some Old Testament and New Testament parallels. One way that we're actually studying this is in our study, we're bringing out applications. We can study all these historical, wonderful, biblical facts. But until we make application of them to ourselves and our lives and where we are, it may not mean as much to it as it can. Moses. Or redemption was needed. Do we need redemption? Like Israel was in bondage. Are we in bondage? Can we be in bondage? What bondage are we? We're free. We're the United States of America. We're free, right? What bondage could it be that we could be involved in? What bondage is it? The bondage of what? Sin. Making a spiritual application of it. Israel, fleshly Israel, was in bondage, in slavery. Spiritual Israel, that's us. We got to be redeemed from sin, correct? We need a redeemer. We need a deliverer from our bondage. We have that. You see the parallels between the Old Testament and New Testament? All right, moving on. Chapter 2 opens up. Who's our topic of discussion here? Who is it leading to? Leading to Moses. Pharaoh had just given a executive order. We see those a lot nowadays, do we not? Pharaoh had given an executive order, verse 22 of the previous chapter. Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born, you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. A federal order, a dictate, an executive order. Then the narrative immediately changes in chapter 2. And there was a man out of the house of what? Levi, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. His wife conceived, she bare a son. And what was his, what was the request of his king? That he should be thrown, that male son should be thrown in. We know this story. What happened? What took place? Mom and sister put him in the little ark of bulrushes and put him out in the Nile River. And sister watched, Miriam watched there as the baby floated down, I guess, picturing it, in the cane or the weeds or whatever. And it just so happened that there was a young lady at the river with all of her maidens with her. Who was it? Pharaoh's daughter. Saw that baby, couldn't resist. Saw that baby, could not resist. Immediately they knew, though, what the heritage was of that child, a Hebrew child, correct? But she took it in anyway. And it just so happened that Miriam pops out of the bushes or whatever and say, hey, that child is going to need milk. It's going to need a mom. It's going to need sustenance. And I know just the person. It was actually Moses' mother, right? Interesting, I think. Think about that relationship all those years of Moses' mother raising that child. You know, of course, she had to turn loose after the child was weaned, I'm sure, but the influence she had on that child for many years. And how that she wanted to keep him and hold him. Think about that. You moms can probably only understand this. Us guys probably can't. Maybe so. How the mom had to turn her child loose to pay this. Anyway, I'm sure there's a lot of thought, a lot of story that we could develop right there. Anyway, but what's taking place here? We saw number one in the first chapter, the need for redemption. That's our topic right here. We're going to break this down in parts. The need for redemption. And now we see in chapter 2 and beginning and probably going on up through chapter 5, the preparation for redemption. And we know who's being prepared, right? Moses is being prepared. Moses is raised under the, probably gets the finest education that could be afforded to the Egyptian Pharaoh's court. But he always understood he was a Hebrew, correct? An event takes place. What is it? It kind of is a change. He evidently becomes a young man, grown up. Something happens. He sees an Egyptian doing what? He sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. And what happens? You killed him. Let's look at that. Verse 11 of chapter 2. And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren and looked upon their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he's very sympathetic to his brethren, even though he was raised in privilege. Now watch this. And he looked this way, and he looked that way, and then when he saw there was no man, what did he do? He slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. There's a story right there. Says I thought it was kind of comical. It says he looked this way and he looked that way. He was looking around making sure nobody was watching. And he slew the Egyptian. And the next day, he observes 2 Hebrews fighting amongst themselves. And he goes and he confronts them. And how do they respond? What's the response he gives? Who made you a king over us? Are you going to kill us like you did that Egyptian? Do what?
Was they accusing people of
Yeah.
someone that was his own?
Let's look at it. And we went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together, and he said unto them, said to him that did the wrong, wherefore smite thou the fellow? And he said to them, who hath made thee a prince or a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killed the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. He looked this way and he looked that way. He thought he had his bases covered. Somebody's always watching. There might not be anybody around for 1,000 miles, but somebody's watching, right? God's watching. God knows. I just thought it was somewhat interesting, though. He looked this way and he looked that way. Well, he's worried now. He has killed a fellow Egyptian. Verse 15, when Pharaoh heard about this, he sought to do what? Kill Moses. What does Moses do? He heads to the hill, does he not? All this is troubling issues, right? But all of this is preparation being made for the redemption of Israel. Preparation. That'll actually get us on all the way up. This preparation period gets us all the way up through chapter 4. Okay. Well, he leaves, right? Pharaoh issues a federal death warrant for him. So he leaves. Where does he go? Where did he go? Midian. Does that name sound familiar? Midian. He went to the land of Midian. And he went to the priests of Midian. Interesting there, right? We're going to talk about that later. The priest of Midian. Interesting. Tell me about Midian, the Midianites. We touched on it a little bit last week, I believe. To whom was Joseph sold to? Midianites, Ishmaelites, they're kind of used intermingled there. Who was Midian? Abraham's son by Keturah. Abraham's son by Keturah. And what was her nationality? What was her nationality? Close but no cigar. That's your homework. All right. But I will tell you that the Midianites were the descendants of Midian. Midian was the son of Keturah. But is it not interesting here? Now, where does he flees to the land of Midian, and he goes to a mountain close by, and something happens in this mountain. It's called Mount Horeb. We also know it as what? Mount Sinai. Back up just a little bit. This priest of Midian, what happens here? Is he a confirmed bachelor, that is Moses? As he is run out of Egypt, he goes to the land of Midian and he just dwells there as a bachelor? No. What's the name of the priest? Ruel. Ruel. Priest of Midian. What kind of priest was he? I think he was a Gentile priest of God. Unless scholars know otherwise, let me know. Dwelling in the land of Midian, the near proximity of Sinai. Okay? I thought that would be interesting. A thought here, I want to stop for just a moment. We see how that God is working to develop the Israelite nation, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. See Joseph come on the scene, the 12 tribes. As we pass through time, God working through this lineage right here to set the law. All right.
You said the priest was Mel. Oh, it's Jethro.
Okay. It is Jethro.
Okay. Same person, two different names?
I believe so.
Okay. Because in chapter 3, it's called Jethro.
I believe it says, verse 18, and when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, how is it that you come too soon? Sorry, my phone's going on. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. Check out your dictionary. I believe it's the same person. Okay? But what's so interesting to me right here, God is working his plan of redemption for us today. The plan of salvation, his scheme of redemption through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the 12 tribes of Israel, and they're going from over to Sinai, and the law was delivered. God is delivering his revelation through this line of group here, the Hebrews. And later on, it's going to be the Jews. But did he forget about the Gentile world? Were they not active? We see all the workings and the avenue of God's will coming through the Israelites. The descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob then came to Israel. But did God at this time completely forget or have nothing to do with the Gentile world outside of that lineage? No. Because there's a priest right here we're talking about. Priest of God. Okay? I always found that interesting. God working with these other individuals. Because I guess at one time, sometimes we may feel that only the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their immediate descendants are the only ones that God dealt with, or God had a relationship with, or they were the only ones that were faithful to God. Not so. Not so. God dealt with and worked with and revealed his will to the patriarchs. And some of them would be just like Jethro, Ruel. Okay? All right. I believe our time has been well spent. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kevin.